Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm back. I'm jet-lagged, but I'm back. We had an extraordinary trip. We went to Berlin, and we met with two of the Germany's leading, I would say probably the world's leading climate scientists, and talked with them on camera about what is being done, what is the state of the art, as it were. And it turns out, if we did away with all the subsidies that we provide for the fossil fuel industry, there would essentially no longer be a fossil fuel industry. I mean, outside of, making plastics and pharmaceuticals and things that, the tiny amounts of fossil fuels can be useful for. And even in those cases, I mean, it's basically just going after the carbon in them, and there's other ways to get that. They had these really cool windmills. They wind turbines. They were vertical. They didn't have like blade. They didn't look like an airplane blade. They looked more like kind of a circular thing that just spun around in a circle. I don't know how to describe it, but they're super efficient. And Germany, of course, the cloudiest country in Europe, is generating enormous amounts of solar power. So that was fascinating. And then we flew up to Tromso, Norway, which is the northern. It's under the Arctic Circle, 60 degrees latitude, and the sun never went down, which was an interesting experience. Wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and hello. You go to sleep when you think, hey, I'm really starting to feel tired. Oh my God, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. But the sun's still out. And but Tromso is just a beautiful town, and the university there has this center called CAGE, C-A-G-E. You can find their website online, and it is the leading, maybe the only, institute in the world that's principal focus is gas hydrates, specifically or largely methane hydrates. Methane, this stuff on the bottom of the ocean floor that for several years I've been saying, oh my God, this could kill us all. They're a little more sanguine about it. They've found enormous amounts of what are called methantropic bacteria that eat methane, and sort of like trees eat carbon dioxide. And so a lot of the methane that is dissociating out of the oceans and coming up as methane plumes into the water is actually, some of it is being absorbed by the water, some of it's being, reacting, but some of it is, most of it is actually being dissolved by these bacteria and turned into biomass, into bacteria, which become food for algae, which become food for little fish, which become food for medium-sized fish, which become food for big-sized fish, and boom, you're in the carbon cycle. That's the good news. The bad news is, while we were there, they had published a report about 2 weeks earlier about this methantropic bacteria and how it actually was reducing, because it was absorbing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and out of the water to combine with the methane, with the bacteria and all this kind of stuff. And so you'll recall back, I don't know, a decade or so ago, maybe 15 years ago, I think it was the Heartland Institute. It's one of those right-wing so-called think tanks, front groups that are supported in part by the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel billionaires, that had published this book, or had helped publish this, or published or promoted the book. We had the author on this show, which is how I remember the specifics of what I do remember of the specifics of it. I mean, this is, like I said, maybe a decade ago. And the whole point of his book is that trees absorb carbon dioxide and turn it into trees, right? And turn it into carbohydrates, into bark and leaves and things. And therefore, more carbon dioxide, happier trees. Well, the problem is that if you hit a certain level of carbon dioxide, it overwhelms the trees. It makes the trees grow so fast, but they don't have all the other nutrients they need. They can't get the phosphorus and the calcium and all that kind of stuff. And instead, it actually starts killing the trees. And so the big question now that they're dealing with in Tromso is, how much methane will it take to overcome that bacteria's need for other things? So anyhow, that was my week. And I didn't see any live polar bears. Louise just put a picture of a polar bear in the bar next to our hotel that I was standing in front of over on her Facebook page, for what it's worth. And you know, it was a very, very interesting trip, and I'm semi-recovered from it. It was also interesting to talk to a bunch of Norwegians and Germans about the United States and about Donald Trump and about all this stuff that's going on. The Comey firing, you know, what's going on with Trump. I'm increasingly convinced, this is pure speculation / opinion, but I'm increasingly convinced that Trump is not so much hiding something that might be embarrassing, but that he's hiding things that might be criminal. And I don't know what they are. I suspect that they may have to do with both the American and the Russian mafia and maybe mobsters in other countries, several of the Stan countries. He's got a Trump hotel in the Philippines. He's got business interests in Turkey, I believe. I think Donald Trump is hiding criminality. And now you've got Chuck Schumer saying, you want a new FBI director? Good luck. Give us a special and independent prosecutor first. Now, Congress used to, you know, for a while, Congress had the power to appoint that person. That law expired. But the Justice Department still has the ability to do that. Now, Jeff Sessions has recused himself from anything having to do with Trump investigations, at least as they relate to Russia, because Jeff Sessions himself lied before Congress under oath about talking to members of the Russian administration. I think it was specifically Sergei Kislyak, the ambassador. So that drops it down to his number 2 guy, whose name is, what, Rosenberg or something like that? It's not Rosenberg, but it's something close to that. In any case, his number 2 guy, you know, the guy who wrote the memo about you ought to fire Comey because of what he did to Hillary. Like, we're all buying that, right? Rosenstein? Thank you, Trey. Trey is my alternate brain. Trey and Chris and Nate, between the 3 of them, they keep me going. And the more I look, the more I, you know, it's like this has been the history of his businesses. You know, is doing business with the mob and doing. I mean, to a certain extent, I suppose if you're a developer in New York, you have to do business with the mob. But when you're president of the United States, there's a different level of scrutiny, and there's a different set of standards that you should live by. I don't know how to say it beyond that. Just, you know, very, very straightforward stuff. And an interesting, while just coming back from Norway, there's an interesting piece here in the New York Times, the opinion pages by Lee Siegel. It's called "For Liberals, Is It Time to Move to Norway?" Norway this year, in the, you know, a couple of years ago, Louise and I did this show for a week or 2 from Denmark because Denmark was rated the #1 happiest country in the world. This year it was Norway. And so Lee Siegel is, you know, writing about he or she spent a bunch of time in Norway, and, you know, then came back and thought about going back to Norway with George W. Bush, and, you know, now. But it raises an interesting question. Norway has world-class health care, world-class higher education. It's all free. Lee writes, "The contrast makes me want to weep. For the first time in 40 years, and now with a wife and 2 children," I guess Lee is a man, "I find myself planning to propose to my wife that we all move to another country." And then basically concludes it by saying, "No, goodbye, Norway. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to fight," which is how I feel. I mean, my father's mother and father both came from Norway. I felt very at home. I'm half Norwegian. I felt very at home there. Saw a lot of people who looked like a lot of my relatives, which was an interesting experience. In fact, there was one waitress who looked so much like my cousin, I almost said something. A cousin who has now passed away. But what are you thinking of doing? How are you reacting to this? I mean, this is truly bizarre times. The Sunday Review of the New York Times by the editorial board. The new standards for Republicans in America. If you're president, you can freely attack Twitter's average citizens, private citizens on Twitter. You can delegitimize federal judges who rule against you. You can refuse to take responsibility for military actions gone awry. You can fire the FBI chief while he's investigating you. You can accuse a former president without evidence of an impeachable offense. You can employ top aides with financial and other connections to a hostile foreign power. You can blame the judiciary in advance for terror attacks. You can call the media the enemy of the American people. I mean, it goes on and on. It's really extraordinary.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I got to tell you, the biggest sensation I had when leaving the United States was like I was leaving some sort of bizarro world. And while being in Europe, like normal. Wow, this is normal.